Hello and welcome to Insight from Logicalis. You're closer to a software-defined data center than you think. I'm your host, Arthur Germain, and my guest today is industry expert David Angradi, Director of Software-Defined Solutions for Logicalis US. David helps CXOs embrace third platform computing, where the worlds of mobile and cloud computing, social media, and big data collide. When he meets with clients, his goal is to show them how a software-defined data center can help them leverage existing technology and hybrid cloud solutions, adding a software and services layer on top to deliver a better user experience and create a more advanced, services-defined enterprise. It's a tall order, but one David says he and Logicalis are prepared to fill. During today's webinar event, we will examine how creating a management layer that spans all data center resources allows IT departments to easily define, develop, and deploy services in response to an organization's rapidly changing business needs. David will share use cases, best practices, and real-world examples to help you formulate your individual SDDC strategy. Plus, you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions after the webinar. Now I'd like to welcome David Angradi to the program.
Thank you, Arthur, and good morning, and thanks everybody for joining our call today on Software-Defined Data Center. And to kind of talk a little bit through an agenda, some things we want to really discuss today, specifically around SDDC, and first and foremost, give you a little bit of insight in terms of what we're seeing out there that is driving the need for companies to move to this sort of a model around software-defined data center, and even some examples of what you can actually do with it. I get a lot of questions from customers around what are the sorts of things that I can do. So assuming I move to this model, what are the use cases? What are the best practices? How do I bridge that gap that I currently see between our business users that are building applications and managing applications and using it and IT? That still continues to be a little bit of a chasm in some cases with businesses. So we'll talk a little bit about how to formulate a plan and a strategy to bridge that gap. And then finally, we'll talk through just a use case of a particular customer that really is a great example of where we see an effective implementation of SDDC, and then just some general recommendations and guidelines, and then we can open it up for questions for Q&A. So first, what is a definition of SDDC? And there's a lot of definitions out there right now, and every vendor has got their own sort of a term, from things like software-defined infrastructure. You hear it as cloud. I mean, it's really become kind of a hodgepodge of different words with different meanings depending upon the audience that you speak to. But for purposes of this webinar, SDDC is really a data center in which all the components, or as many of the components as possible across your server, your network, your storage, are virtualized and delivered as a service. But the other thing that we add on top of this, which we think is really critically important to a truly software-defined data center, is you need to have a certain level of management and automation on top. It's one thing to go out and virtualize different components, and there's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained from that. But where we still see a big gap in a lot of our customer base is that next tier up, which we're kind of calling here management and automation. And that's really a critical component for companies to take a look at, to be able to take that next step, to be able to do better hybrid cloud management, better just IT operations management within their own infrastructure. So what's driving the need for SDDC? What are we really seeing out there that's driving it? And this is something I'm sure if you've seen any vendor presentation, they're going to talk about this whole notion of a digital revolution, digital transformation. I mean, there's a lot of names for it. And it really is fundamentally true that the operating model that companies are being forced to run under are just changing at a velocity that I don't think anyone's really seen before. And when we think about in terms of devices and how we're consuming technology, I mean, we're wearing it, we're running with it, we're strapping it to us, driving it, and we're spending it. and it's really creating all sorts of new operating models out there. I went out for a run last night, and I had my Apple Watch on, and I'm using it to track my progress. And as I'm running around, I see a whole bunch of kids, with their iPhones, up, obviously playing Pokemon Go, which is just this whole new dynamic that we're seeing out there. And it's amazing how, companies are taking advantage of this digital transformation to create a whole new business models. I've actually read that one application for Nintendo very well may save the organization. And though you may not look at a company like Nintendo and think of them as kind of cutting edge and disruptive, in terms of the market, right? They're fighting the console wars with Microsoft, Sony. They came out with this app that suddenly everybody downloaded, and now they're creating all this new revenue stream that didn't exist before. So, you don't necessarily have to be born in the cloud to create disruptive business models. I mean, we are seeing brick and mortar type companies that are traditional data centers that are actually taking advantage of this. And it's really creating, this whole new dynamic. And I think the other big area is this whole notion of cloud. And, unfortunately, the misperception that cloud is this be all end all. As we reach for the cloud and we try and, drive better operations through use of cloud, it's even created its own issues, and it's kind of created this need for speed, as Gartner calls it. And this is some great bullets that I think really, if you take a look at your own business in terms of where it's going in the market conditions, the need to be able to drive speed within your own environment is just increasingly important. In a connected world, your windows of opportunities, as you see, really come and go fast, and so do threats. Again, I'll use the Nintendo example with Pokemon Go. I mean, that almost literally came out of nowhere. And I'm sure you're going to start seeing a rush to market from a number of different companies trying to compete with them based on the success. So, as I said earlier, you don't have to be born in the cloud to be able to create disruptive sorts of business models. The second area that's driving, I believe, the need for speed is this whole consumerization of expectation. Everybody wants immediate gratification. Everybody wants to be able to log into a portal and be able to select from a menu of services, their ability to be able to consume different types of, options, services, wherever they may be. And that, as I'm sure everyone is aware, has definitely filtered into the enterprise. Business users are looking for that same level of service from their own business as they get from the Amazons of the world and, the Facebooks and all these different online and digital sorts of companies that are allowing them to consume services that way. The third area, which, and again, is as much as it creates a need for speed, it's also going to be a recommendation that we talk about a little bit later, and that you do have to fail faster to win. You have to, if you're going to place big bets out there, you're going to have to understand that there's going to be failure along the way. You are going to lose occasionally, and that's okay. That big wins really require placing bets and losing occasionally. I think this is really a great bullet to really think about. And the fourth area, and it's a term that I've used quite often, is just really this whole notion of the art of the possible. At the end of the day, it's really not a technology discussion as much as all of this is a business process discussion. There's so many different examples and so many different vendors out there that are offering technologies that are going to allow you to do a lot of these sorts of things, to be able to get agility and speed and dynamically be able to create workloads that you've never been able to do before. What's really critical is just this need to be able to pull all of this stuff together, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. The role of the CIO has fundamentally changed, I think, over the last several years, and this just really is this whole notion of saying businesses today and CIOs need to deliver a digital-ready experience for their internal customers, their external customers, their business partners, that sort of thing. And when you think about moving from a legacy traditional way of managing a data center to this new way of being able to develop anywhere, applications anywhere, data anywhere, with giving visibility, automation, security, and standards, that's a pretty daunting task. Like we talked about in the intro, it seems as though this is almost an insurmountable sort of an approach that businesses need to take. But, like the title says, you really are closer to being able to do this than you probably think you are. This next slide, I actually read this in a book, and I used it from a book called I Speak Cloud. And when you look at the current state of cloud, we talked about digital consumption being at an all-time high. That's not going away. It's going to continue to grow. Mobility, big data, cloud-based consumption of services is just going to continue to grow. And when you look at existing enterprise infrastructures, shadow IT has already crept in there. They're already doing it. And what this actually portrays is this whole notion of a cloud Hydra, that you're already doing these sorts of things. These things are already happening inside your environment today, whether you realize it or not. And as you think about moving to more of a cloud-based software-defined sort of a delivery model, what we're seeing a lot of customers find is that, there's a pretty big resource and skill shortage out there. It's a big part of this whole process is getting your own people's skill sets to be updated, to take advantage of this, and bringing in new skills to kind of complement that. And what we're seeing here is that it's really tough to find those folks. So there's going to be a certain amount of retraining that you're going to need to go through. Another big area that we see coming up is compliance. And compliance as it relates to security, business, and regulatory sorts of objectives. They tend to get overlooked, right? Because when you look at whether you're using a Dropbox or, platform as a service, Salesforce, you name all these different applications that are out there, a lot of times the ability to be able to drive consistent regulatory compliance and security standards across the enterprise becomes increasingly difficult when you really don't have a whole lot of visibility in terms of where your internal folks are actually going and the sorts of cloud services that they're actually consuming. Because cloud sprawl is a real thing. And I think as you take a look at this, when we talk about shadow IT isn't just a developer going out there and provisioning out on Amazon because they're trying to get their work done. Shadow IT is Dropbox, private cloud solutions, Box.com, Facebook, Gmail, all of these sorts of things are really shadow IT. And when you really add all this up, what a lot of companies find is that costs tend to get pretty out of control, especially if people are out there paying for this stuff on their corporate credit cards. The other, I think, two things that we're really seeing out there is there's a big push to utilize open source to build out cloud data centers. So customer after customer that we talk to, we're seeing them start to deploy more open source technologies out there. And there's a major push to be able to automate config change and asset management functions. So again, it's almost impossible to manage what you don't know. And so before you can really implement a software-defined cloud strategy, you really have to get a good feel for what it is that you have, what's your current portfolio of capabilities today, and then the ability to map all this stuff out and manage it moving forward. So what can you do with software-defined data center? So we talked about this notion of SDDC being virtualizing compute, storage, and network. And regardless of where your maturity is at each of those three areas, there's a lot you can actually do. And I'll highlight a couple of different things that we're seeing very, very common within our customer base. The first bullet, provision environments on demand. One of the most basic use cases that we deliver for customers is full stack, physical or virtual infrastructure with a single click. When you think about how Amazon or Microsoft Azure or even Google Cloud gives you that ability to be able to go in and with a credit card go out and provision an application stack or a developer stack or whatever, what we see is a lot of customers say, hey, that's great, and I know I can consume it virtually, but I want to be able to do this inside my own data center. I've made heavy investments in technology that I want to take advantage of. I want my developers to be able to go in and hit a single button to be able to provision the application stack that they need to build and test on. And that's a very near possibility. And we'll talk a little bit more later around how you do this. The other big area we see a lot of is just around operations management. Patching is a great example. Nobody likes to patch servers. But when you think about your security posture and how important it is to maintain a certain configuration state within your servers, patching is critically important. And I talk to a lot of customers that really to this day don't really have a good feel around patching. And it's not because the tools aren't capable of doing it. They certainly can. Nobody just likes to do it, right? It's just one of those kind of low-level things that, IT folks have to do, but they don't necessarily like it. So when you become more software-defined, one of the easiest low-hanging fruit things to do are to build your server, build your application, and patch it. It's probably the most common use case we deliver for customers even to this day. The next one is a little bit of an extension, and it really kind of moves more into that developer realm. So as you're going through this digital transformation and you're becoming software-defined, the idea of being able to build out and test applications faster is critically important. Whether you're doing it inside your own data center or leveraging a public cloud, or maybe even doing some combination of both, it's really important that you have to streamline production to be able to rapidly build, stage, and deploy code and applications. The days of pushing out an application update over a year are over. People want app updates, at much faster intervals. And as you move to more of an agile sort of an environment, the idea of a 12-month release cycle just isn't happening. It's 6, 12-week type release cycles, right? Every customer ultimately is different, but what they can find is a challenge is if I'm moving from a 12-month release cycle to call it a 6-month or even a 3-month release cycle, that's going to require dramatic changes to process. And that's where being software defined is really going to help you do that. Also, as it relates to regression testing, I've talked to customers that, I had one customer I was on the call with the other day that they have 16,000 test cases that they run. And that by the end of the year, they'll be in upwards of 20,000 because they're building so many applications for so many different ways of consumption. The amount of test cases that they actually have to run have increased dramatically. So becoming software defined and adding an automation and orchestration to that is going to obviously help them actually drive more efficiency and allow them to grow faster. Final 2 bullets here are enabling self-service portals and delivering resources just in time. And, everybody wants to have that user experience to be able to go in to a catalog with a certain menu of services and be able to click a button and, within 10 minutes or some reasonable amount of time, I get IT resources. Whether it's provisioning an application, requesting a notebook, a virtual desktop, whatever the case may be, a password reset, whatever the case may be, what we're seeing is that companies are looking to push more of this out into the end user's hands. And that's where this notion of self-service portals becomes critically important, is allowing users to be able to access those servers via a single click. And the best way to do this is at a foundational level. It is becoming more software defined. Because the more software defined you become, the easier it is to push the request and the creation of these services out towards your endpoints. It also allows you to deliver resources really just in time. So as you think about this cloud-based world that we're moving into, and as you become more digital in nature and you're pushing more content out to the web, you have to be ready for those peaks and valleys that are going to occur in terms of the consumption of your service. Because the last thing you want is a user to either log onto their phone or a web application to access one of your services or a request service or something, and suddenly it takes too long because the servers are bogged down. And you want to be able to quickly identify that and be able to add capacity as needed. Because if there's any delay in a request that a user makes for your services and your ability to deliver on it, hey, chances are they're going to go somewhere else. So it's a big challenge for traditional data centers to move into that sort of a model. And again, that's where software-defined can be just of absolutely huge value. And we talked a lot about request and building, but what about kind of managing? Where I think when people talk about software-defined data center, they think it's around, well, it's building servers, it's breaking down servers, it's doing things like that. Well, that's part of it, but there's also is better enabling you to manage your IT operations more efficiently. An example would be Clip. So we do a lot of projects where we're just linking up their monitoring system with their ticketing system, and then driving in process level automation to go triage events. So if a server is suddenly running slow and it's a critical web server, wow, wouldn't it be great if your monitoring system saw that, but then can go out and say, well, what was the latest configuration? Has anybody made any changes within the last 24 hours? And grab a whole bunch of information and then take that and open up an incident ticket within your help desk, so that when your level 1 person opens up that ticket, they can see all the information that's relevant to that particular server so that they can quickly identify the problem. The other thing we see customers doing is just this notion of self-healing. So things like service restarts, things of that nature, that they don't want to have a help desk person have to deal with. But if it's going to be the same response every single time, we're seeing companies move towards self-healing. So building in that automation to be able to dynamically triage and resolve the issue, but making sure that the ticketing system, the CMDB, is all updated so that there's a record, there's a trail of what occurred, so that they can actually track how many times these things are happening. But what we're doing is moving that manual intervention out of it. The other area is just health checks. I mean, how many times do you have to go out and run health checks across your server, your network, and storage environment? Or how many times are you not doing it because you just don't have enough people or resources? And this is where becoming software-defined can allow you to run those periodic checks, whether they be out-of-the-box sorts of checks or some sort of custom script or something that you need to be able to run. There's a lot of capability in here to be able to proactively make sure your network or your servers or your storage are all running at optimal performance. And if they are not, be able to quickly identify where those issues are and remediate. Because failure to do that, especially in a, call it a cloud software-defined world, is going to make your lives really, really difficult. Because the last thing you're going to want to do is become software-defined, start pushing out the consumption of services out to your user, and now suddenly a whole host of problems are going to come back on your help desk people. So you really want to put a very prescriptive plan in place that's going to walk you through how you're going to manage all those systems. So let's talk a little bit about the plan to bridge that gap between business and IT. And I think what's really important to note here, when shadow IT really became a thing, it became a thing because people were there, the developers were there, and they needed to do their jobs. They needed to build out their applications. They needed to get things done faster. And because IT struggled to keep up with it, they went out to Amazon or Microsoft or whoever it was to be able to go get those resources they need. You can add in things like Dropbox and Box.com and a lot of these other services to do that. And that's really created a fundamental problem that enterprise IT has to deal with. So it's really critical when you're thinking about moving to the cloud or becoming more software-defined, that you build that right technology plan. Because our feeling is that it's going to be a hybrid world. Most companies we talk to are not going fully cloud native. They certainly want to take advantage of public cloud services. Heck, they even want to be able to take advantage of multiple cloud services, right? When you think about Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they all have great value props. But let's be honest, they're all beating each other up on price and technology and capability. And when one company comes out with one, it's a matter of time before the other one either leapfrogs them. So we believe it's going to be a hybrid world. And what's critical within that hybrid world is really giving you guys the tools and the capability to be able to leverage the best cloud provider given the workload. And how we do that is really help you build that right technology plan. Because on the one end, you have IT that's still managing things as they normally do. At the upper end, we have it as DevOps. We still see a pretty big chasm in a lot of cases between development teams and IT teams. And a lot of what we do and a lot of our consulting with our customers is really helping them bridge that gap, cross the chasm, whatever you want to call it. We see the developer community out there really embracing open source technologies because it's fast, they like it, it's fairly inexpensive when you look at some of the community versions that are out there. But we see IT looking at and figuring out, well, I still need to have security. I still need governance. I still need change control. I still need to identify standards across all of these environments, whether they be inside my own data center or in a public cloud. So there's a bit of a struggle that we see going on in terms of moving organizations to this new model. The question becomes, how do you allow your developers to remain innovative, to deliver continuous delivery, continuous integration, while at the same time enforcing change control, security, governance, and compliance, and things of that nature? That's not necessarily the easiest task, but at the same time, you're a lot closer than you think you are in terms of being able to implement it. APIs are rich enough out there that it makes it a lot easier to pull all these things together. And we do that in a lot of cases through automation. It's part of software-defined data center, right? It's not just virtualizing those assets to help you be able to deliver things as a service. It's automation. It's the ability to tie all these different pieces together so that your processes become business aligned. Your enterprise service management, your ITSM, which is more IT aligned, are all bridged together so that you give your developers access to the tools and the process to allow them to drive continuous delivery, continuous integration, agile type of initiatives, but at the same time, allowing your IT organization to be able to implement change control, security, and governance. So some things to think about and some key questions that we can certainly help discuss with you, but it's stuff to think about. We see a lot of customers talking about OEM versus open source. What is the right balance? How do I actually manage the open source solutions that are out there? How do I layer in the traditional OEM solutions, which tend to be stronger around things like change control and security and governance, with open source solutions, which tend to be a little more innovative and easier to use for the development community? So that's definitely something that we need to address. Skills of your existing people and the capabilities that they have. So as you think about moving to this new operating model, how are your skills going to be transitioned? What's going to be that gap plan that gets created to get your folks from where they are today to where they need to be to allow you to kind of digitally transform your environment? Interoperability. You've made investments in technologies. You have tools. So part of what we try and do is reuse as many of those tools as we possibly can. So interoperability is key as you're building out applications and understanding, that building an application within your own data center may be different than how you build it in Azure, which may be different than how you build it within AWS. So understanding that interoperability and planning for that is going to be very, very critical. We already talked about your existing investments. You have to take that into account. I'm sure everyone on the phone here doesn't have an unlimited budget to go out and be cloud, right? And be software defined. So as you're thinking about that technology plan, you're going to have to do some level of tools rationalization to take a look at those existing investments and understand which ones you can use, which ones need to be sunsetted, and are there any potential new tools that need to be brought into the fold? And that's a real critical piece of the assessments, for example, that we talk to. I think the other area is, do you want to be the provider of the services or a broker? And when I say provider of it, we still see some customers that have no intention of going out into public cloud, that they're going to do all of this stuff in-house, and they're going to be a provider. We see customers that want to be brokers, to say, you know what, we're going to move away from this notion of having a huge data center on-prem. What we really want to move towards is this notion of being a broker. So, if you look down here at change, control, security, governance, they want to say, I'm going to broker those services for IT versus actually delivering them. So I'll give my users the ability to go provision applications, network, storage, whatever it may be, but I'm going to come in and actually ensure that change control, governance, all these sorts of things are implemented properly. So it's very important to understand what do you want to be when you grow up, right, for lack of a better word. So a couple best practices, kind of good, better, best. We talk a lot about cloud automation and really where you can go and kind of what does that look like. We see, good in terms of cloud automation for IT is really getting into more runbook automation and self-service. So again, we'll talk a little bit later about, we talked about use cases and some other things, but the question becomes really what does a good environment look like? Well, a good environment is going to have some level of runbook automation built in, provisioning servers, infrastructure as a service, and maybe even some cloud management, right? The ability to provision on another cloud. A better version is, hey, I'm going to implement automation across my runbooks, but I'm going to drive policy and standardization across my environment. So I'm going to allow access to infrastructure as a service and to be able to provision applications. I'm going to allow you to do it on multiple clouds, but now I'm going to add in policies. I'm going to start creating application blueprints. I'm going to start delivering an additional level of services that you're going to be able to consume. Finally, the best is going to be around full process orchestration with service catalog along with ITSM integration. So as you're looking to implement an ITSM strategy or enterprise service management, whatever you want to call it, the best, most high-performing clouds that we see out there are ones that pull all of this together. And this is independent of where these clouds exist, whether it's in your data center, somebody else's data center, a Logicalis' data center, a public cloud, whatever. The best implementations are ones that offer infrastructure as a service across any cloud with full application and software-defined data center blueprints. So what this is showing you is that there is a process, there is a path to get you up to this level. From an IT perspective, which we showed on the last slide, let's move a little bit more to the developer side. As you think about this digital transformation, it's important to look at the application folks. The folks that are building the applications that your users are consuming and what's good, better, best for them. Good, which we see a lot of companies doing, is base level configuration management across infrastructure as a service. Better is now allowing them, like we talked about earlier, to be able to start doing infrastructure as code, to be able to set up these containers, right? We talk about Docker, for example, which we see a lot in the community. The ability to create these infrastructure components as code that your developers can just kind of grab as they need to be able to streamline and speed up the delivery process. All the way through to the nirvana, which is this whole idea of continuous delivery, right? This ability to be able to provision the application, build the application, test the application, all the way through to promote it to production, all the way through to, hey, I need to go fix an issue, fix an error, all of that. And get into this whole idea of continuous delivery, continuous integration across the different cloud environments. So the software-defined environment that exists within your own data center, and obviously the software-defined environment which exists out in Amazon, Google, whatever combination that you choose. So one thing I skipped a slide accidentally. So the other thing to think about is this whole idea, again, of digital ready framework. As you look at your environment and you begin to plan, these are just elements to think about, right? As we talk about going up the stack, everybody's got infrastructure. And to some degree, you've probably already virtualized, which is that second layer. As you start moving to become more software defined and more, again, I do the air quotes, cloud-like, you need to start now taking these next steps. The third step being automation. I see a lot of companies starting to do, I call it silos or islands of automation. The server group has their own way of doing things. The storage group has their own way, the apps people, so on and so forth. As you become more software defined, the idea is that you now have to begin now pulling all of these different together, right? And adding in what we would call that cloud service integration layer. So as you become software defined and you start offering up these applications to be consumed via self-service, whether they be on-prem or off, you're going to have to now create an integration layer that pulls all of this together. And then the other piece is instrumentation and analytics. As you move to the self-service, spin up, spin down, capacity on demand, it's really important that you have instrumentation and analytics. Because on the left-hand side, you're going to have security, governance, and compliance that's going to have to be dealt with. And on the right-hand side, you're going to have business and visibility really locked down. And in order for you to really transform to become software-defined, all of these components absolutely need to exist. And this is why you'll hear me say a lot, you're closer to it than you think. Why? You have infrastructure that's digital ready. You have virtualization already. Really, it's just a matter of adding in automation, integration, and some analytics. And you're, for the most part, there. Because as we talk about this service-defined enterprise and moving towards it, it's really three pieces, right? The software-defined data center is really nothing more than your existing infrastructure, or even infrastructure that exists out in Amazon or one of these other cloud providers, along with this cloud service layer and this automation layer on top of it. So it's virtualizing the infrastructure, making it digital ready, and then adding in automation, orchestration, management. And that's your software-defined data center. But really for us, it's not the complete picture of where you need to be. If you remember the one slide where I talked about integration with ITSM, for a company to be truly service-defined and even software-defined, you really do need to have an enterprise service management or ITSM platform in there. Change, control, incident, problem. Critically important to have integration there. Because as you move to more of a self-service sort of an environment from an IT perspective, and from an application perspective, as you move to become more continuous delivery, continuous integration, it's going to be critically important that you're going to have a single source of where you're going to manage all of that process at a business level. And that's really where the ITSM platforms are going to come in. So it is critical as you move to become more software-defined data center or software-defined that you begin thinking about how am I going to integrate this within my IT process? How am I going to enforce ITIL best practices, for example, within my environment? And for those of you that are Logicalis customers, and I know there's some of them on there, you've probably seen this slide, so I'm not going to really spend a whole ton of time on it. Whoops, sorry about that. Is really this transformation journey. And when we do our workshops, a lot of what we try and do is understand where you are on this continuum. You know, most companies tend to be somewhere, you know, between, you know, I'm virtualized, I may have some converged infrastructure, I may not, you know, depending upon where you're at. I'm certainly doing some level of protection. You know, it's really automation and orchestration is where we see a lot of low-hanging fruit. You know, we see companies jumping to cloud services and not doing the automation orchestration component of it. So it's critical as you think about your journey from your traditional data center to more cloud-based, you really can't skip these steps. Because if you skip the steps, you're going to run into a lot of problems in terms of managing it. You know, that cloud sprawl I talked about is mainly because very little automation and orchestration tends to be put in place to actually manage that. And that's why sprawl happens. If you remember when VMware came out with the virtualization, there was VM sprawl. And then all of a sudden, companies started coming out with different technologies to kind of manage that and drive configuration management and that sort of thing. It's critical that as you think about adopting more cloud services, that you have this layer in there, called a cloud management layer, called an orchestration layer. A lot of people have different names for it. But there has to be that layer in there, above your software-defined layer, above that virtual layer, that has all those if-then statements, that knows, based upon your own individual policies, what users can and cannot do, and allows them to be able to have access to those systems properly, with all the while having security and governance in place. I see too many companies that just jump right to cloud services and don't spend a lot of time on automation and orchestration. And that really makes becoming software-defined exceptionally difficult. So let's talk about some use case, or a use case, and then some recommendations, and then we'll open it up for a little Q&A. So this particular customer here, HR software, it's a human resource software provider. It's basically a SaaS application, and it really is a great example of what I just talked about. in the previous slides. They've moved to more of a SaaS-based model for their application, and there may be folks on the call that are looking to move their applications to more SaaS-based, so maybe this is relevant. But regardless of how you're doing it, I think it's just a great use case to kind of pull it all together. And what was happening was, when their salespeople would go out and actually close a deal on a new customer, it was taking in upwards of 2 months to actually onboard this new customers. So you think about, an order to cash sort of an approach. If your order to cash is 2 months, man, that's not really good, right? So if you think about being able to onboard customers faster and being able to actually generate that revenue faster. So if your order to cash suddenly became a month or a week, think about how, as you grow your business, how that's going to, really increase cash flow dramatically. So what we did is we went in and, started with a workshop, and actually start to understand exactly what it was that was causing, it take to 2 minutes to be able to do this. And what we found was that every application pillar that they had a different team, different development team, different methodology, different resource requirements, and then being able to pull all this together was really labor intensive. So there was not a whole lot of automation in there. And there was a lot of tribal knowledge. I think if you even look at the state of your own organizations, since I've been here at Logicalis talking to customers, since last year, there's a lot of tribal knowledge out there. And tribal knowledge in a software-defined world is really not good, right? You really want to be able to standardize as much as you can. So the solution we worked with them was to get with the DevOps team and help them identify the process and tools that were involved in the onboarding process. Did a tools rationalization to understand, are we using the right tools? How do we drive standardization? How do we help you accelerate your ability to actually move? How about bringing in automation and orchestration to be able to do this? So we brought those tools in and worked with the team to allow them to use their current tools to build out their applications and the way that they wanted to, but be able to create that standardized layer. Again, call it a cloud management layer, an orchestration layer, automation layer. Different companies call it different things. But we brought in this layer to actually pull it all together. And the result was the customer was able to build and onboard a customer in about under 4 hours, because we pulled together, and this is inclusive of everything: servers, networks, databases, web servers, content that they needed to deliver out, and even CMDB. So the ability to be able to populate the CMDB so that they have a full inventory of everything that's out there. So just a great example of, 3 big use cases: customer onboarding, full stack provisioning, and again, what I'd call DevOps automation. I'm not saying that we're implementing a continuous delivery, continuous integration sort of a model. This is really about enabling them to get together with IT to be able to bring everything together to be able to onboard customers faster. Now, the follow-on sorts of projects that they will now be undertaking is this whole idea of continuous delivery, continuous integration. But before you can do those sorts of things, you really have to kind of lock down your own environment first. Become software-defined, implement automation, orchestration, and management, implement standards, blueprints, those sorts of things. And this customer did that, and they got tremendous benefit out of it. So let's talk about some kind of recommendations, and then love to open it up for questions, or you can use the chat window down at the bottom right of your screen to do it that way. Some best practices to think about. The first thing is think applications. That's really what you want to think about. Being able to deliver infrastructure as a service and some base level things, guys, that's table stakes now. You have to do it. And what you really need to focus on is the application and how you want the service to be deployed, what you want the service to look like, what SLAs you want around it, that sort of thing. And if you focus on the application and the business requirements first, all the rest of that stuff as it relates to IT, governance, all those things we talked about are going to very easily fall into place. Like I say with any business, start with the problem you're trying to solve and work backwards. Don't focus on your infrastructure and work up to the application. That's disastrous. You really want to work the other way around. For those of you that are Gartner subscribers, you really want to think bimodal. You have a legacy data center, you have legacy infrastructure. That's what Gartner would call mode 1. Mode 2 is going to be this new way of doing things. The very highly agile, cloud-based development of applications. It's really important that as you're taking a look at how you're going to deliver those services in a bimodal way, that you effectively match IT to those services. And what I mean by that is there may be services, if you think from an application perspective, that are going to be better served, built, provisioned, and managed on a public cloud. But you may have other services where, hey, you know what, that's tied to some intellectual property and some IP that we own and that we don't want to put out in the cloud. We want to have in our own infrastructure. So that's what I mean when I say think bimodal. But as it relates to services and making sure you're matching the right IT with the right services, you got to really think agility. Whether you're going to move to an agile sort of a model, you really have to think agility where agility is needed. Not every application, not every service is going to need the dynamic nature that cloud offers. So take that into account when you're planning. Really take a good look at your different applications in terms of how you're delivering those applications. There may be some that need to be delivered in terms of legacy physical infrastructure. There may be applications that, hey, you know what? If I become more software defined and I virtualize better and I take advantage of all this, boy, I can really deliver all those in-house. But there may be applications where you look at and say, you know what? Maybe these are better off look to a cloud and move those to a cloud. And think about new services, not just old ones, and be proactive. I'll use the example I talked about, the Pokemon Go. I'm sure that came up with somebody in a meeting to think about something brand new. Instead of just going out and fighting the console wars, somebody somewhere inside of Nintendo came up with this idea to do something different, to deliver a service different. And I'm sure that had a downstream impact on their IT infrastructure to actually support this sort of an environment, right? I mean, I don't know if your kids had the same problem my kids. The first couple of days, they couldn't log in. They couldn't get into the web servers because I'm sure those servers were getting hit. So definitely think new services in addition to old. Agility without governance is like a race car without a steering wheel. Guys, if you want to be agile and you want to be able to get into this dynamic nature of spinning up, spinning down, you really have to think about governance. Governance more often than not becomes a little bit of an afterthought because you're so focused on being able to deliver the service out to your customer. And as I'm sure you're all aware, that's really ripe for problems, in the event whether it's an audit or a security risk or what. So it's really critical to think about governance and what are the specific governance requirements, whether they be regulatory or your own internal standards that you want to implement and drive, and make sure this is part of the actual process. I love this one. Think big, but start small. When you look at the technology that's out there in this space, guys, it's limitless. It is the art of the possible. It is not a technology issue, right? There's technology out there from Lord knows how many vendors are going to help you do all this stuff. It's really about your business and what it is that you're trying to do. So think big and take baby steps and understand that you're going to trip along the way, and that's okay because, again, we're going to have this whole idea of continuous improvement along the way and evolve. Start with small, medium, large type options. And then as you see what the consumption model looks like, evolve. Really important. And I think the final piece is we bring a lot to the table in terms of helping you really map out, that transformation kind of to a service-defined enterprise. It starts with understanding your current state, figuring out from a software-defined perspective where you're at and helping you go there, and then kind of taking you out to that next tier. Again, I apologize, not ready for the questions yet. I'm going to jump through just a couple real quick slides, of Logicalis and what we try and bring to the table. We do strive to avoid rip and replace as best as we can. It's going to help you avoid unnecessary infrastructure investments. We have the unique advantage because we are a solutions provider of being able to take more of a services-centric approach. There's a lot of vendors out there that have a lot of great technology, that will come in and say, well, you buy all of our stuff, we're going to solve your problems. And we can certainly help you with that sort of a model. More often than not, it's not rip and replace. It's more of a fill in the blanks and connect the dots sort of an approach. And that's what we try and take. Now, full disclosure, we don't have expertise across every vendor out there, right? We have core capabilities across a lot of different vendors, but we understand how to integrate and orchestrate processes across different vendors. So in a lot of cases, we'll work with customers with their own SMEs on staff because we may not necessarily have expertise in a particular product, but we have expertise in the ability to help you become software defined and automate and orchestrate. We can then work with those folks to actually drive orchestration across your environment very, very effectively. We are somewhat vendor neutral. We say vendor neutral, but I always say it's more of a services-centric approach. It enables us to make those best use of technologies and allow you to say, hey, I like Amazon versus Azure versus Google. I like, Cisco versus, EMC versus, whoever. And so we want you to make those technology decisions. We want to help you make those technology decisions and take advantage of them in the best way that we can. I talked about it earlier, and we focus on the problem and we work backwards. We don't focus on a product that we're trying to sell you and work towards your problem. We really want to take your needs, what it is that you're trying to do, and work backwards. And the only way we can really effectively do this is by taking this vendor neutral services-centric approach to doing this. The last thing we want to do is just come in there and say, oh, you got to buy this product, that product, or that product. Now, as part of our business requirements gathering, we may need to go out and make some recommendations of some tools that you may need to fill in the blanks. That may happen. But what's critical is we're not taking that product-centric approach. We're going to take more of a services-centric approach that is going to be fit to what you're trying to do. We can't build you a map unless we understand where you're going. And I think the final piece is, there's a lot of people talking like this, right? I think you can go to any vendor presentation or even partner presentation and, you're going to hear similar sorts of things. But I think what really separates us is our people. And it's the folks that we have on staff that have been doing this for years, whether it's at the vendor level, the customer level, the integrator level, whatever it is. And, tools may change over the years. Different vendors come up, come down, get acquired, that sort of thing. But what's very difficult to kind of mimic is just expertise and years of expertise of understanding how to drive these solutions within customers to allow them to achieve the sorts of outcomes they're looking for. That's hard to find. How many times have you worked with an organization, not because necessarily it was the best product out there, but because the architect that was working with me, man, I'm really comfortable with that person. I really want them involved. And those are the kind of people that we have here to be able to work with you to understand, to say, look, we're going to help you and bring years of expertise to make this transition easier for you. And then finally, just to kind of a real quick summary, our software-defined solutions accomplish 4 things. We're going to help you automate, and we're going to make your life easier across your physical, virtual, whether it's compute, network, storage, environment. We're going to help you operationalize your environment and gain efficiencies that you just haven't seen before. We're going to help you move to self-service. We're going to allow you to create on-demand services. For those of you that are building out applications, mobile apps, whatever it is, we can help you accelerate the deployment of these applications. And regardless of what your cloud strategy is, you're going to be hybrid ready. And regardless of which way you go, if you decide you want to consume a lot more public cloud or not so much, regardless of which way you go, our solutions are going to be hybrid cloud ready. So we're not going to lock you into specific cloud providers. We're going to give you flexibility to be able to provision and manage applications inside your own data center or within the public domain. And with that, thank you very much. And I think at this point, we can open it up for any questions.
Thank you, David. As David said, we can kind of open the floor for questions. If you do have a question for David, please type it into the Q&A panel in the lower right. David, while people are doing that, I'm going to ask you one question that I've often heard people have. Really, how do I get started? It seems a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, and that's a great question because it is an expansive sort of thing, and I think it is important that you start somewhere. And the way we typically like to start with customers, is getting an understanding of the current state, right? What are your goals? What's your vision of what you're trying to do? And then take a look at what your current state is, right? Help you with the tools, getting an understanding of what tools you're using, the skills of your people, where are you struggling with, and then help kind of create that, call it that gap analysis between where your current skills are, your current tools are, your current processes are, to, hey, I have this end state, this North Star vision of where I want to go. I'm not quite sure how to get there. And we can do this through a number of ways, right? We have workshops that we do. We have some different assessment type things. We have some paid engagement, non-paid engagement, but it really starts with getting an understanding of what your vision is for your business, where you're trying to go, and then we can help fill in the blanks behind it, skills assessments, tools assessments, things of that nature, to understand where you're at and then actually move and help you move to kind of that North Star vision. All right, here's a question. Go ahead, sorry.
Just going to read that question out. That is one of the attendees asks, how do you see SDDC mapping onto the bimodal concept? You mentioned the Gartner bimodal concept. Are Mode 2 staff using it, or Mode 1, or both?
Well, I would think both, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is, again, let's focus on the end customer that's requesting the service. Ultimately, you don't want your end customer that's consuming the service to even know if it's Mode 1 or Mode 2. So I would argue at the end of the day, you're going to use both. But from a customer perspective, you want to make that completely invisible to them, right? In terms of whether you're using an existing data center, existing applications, call it, I don't like the word legacy, but maybe that's the best word. We'll call it traditional IT. You don't want your user to know that it's an on-prem solution versus, which is be more of a Mode 1 versus a Mode 2, which is going to be more, cloud-based, software-defined, outside in the public domain, whatever. You want that experience to be completely invisible to your customer. So I think the answer to your question is, I think you're going to use both, but I think that the trick is that you don't want your end customer to honestly know the difference in terms of how you're actually using it.
It sounds like you're talking about being as transparent in the way that it's provided, so that users just really aren't seeing any difference. It just appears kind of clear to them. Absolutely.
I mean, I see a lot of customers still, that are already bimodal, or that are calling it or not, where there are certain applications that they're using, in the cloud, versus applications that are using, traditional IT resources. Ultimately, you got to focus on the application in the end state and the delivery that you're trying to get for your customers. You have to pick the best path that you believe is going to deliver that service most effectively. Whether it's a Mode 1 traditional IT or kind of more of a Mode 2, which is going to be in the public cloud. And that's a lot of where we can help you figure out what, and help you rationalize your different applications, the types of services that you're looking to deliver, and figure out what is going to be the best delivery method.
David, you mentioned earlier the hidden costs related to shadow IT. Maybe you could give a couple more details there.
Well, there's a number of costs in there that tend to get hidden. I was talking to one customer. I was out at a conference, and they said, and I had read this in some different areas, but I guess I didn't realize how much of a hit it could be, just bandwidth from the different, network providers, because what was happening was shadow IT can run so rampant, and you think about moving data across, into the public cloud, there's going to be costs for, the actual network that's used to connect it. And we've seen customers, that didn't even realize that that was actually happening, and until suddenly their telco bill comes in, it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? And that's a real hidden cost that people don't think about as they, whether it's shadow IT or just moving into a hybrid public cloud model, is, you also have to take a look at that pipe that is in between, your users, right, and your data center and into the public cloud. And so as you think about the sorts of services that you want to deliver for your customers, that's an important component that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, and may actually steer you in a different direction. So, from a hidden cost, don't forget about that cost in terms of the pipe that's going to be needed to be able to connect your business out to the public cloud relative to the amount of data that's going to cross it. It's really important that you take a look at that.
Well, David, thank you very much for today's presentation. I want all of our attendees to know that the presentation will be recorded and made available to them. It might be appropriate for them or someone else in their organization, and you can find it at us.logicalis.com.